Good morning, Life class. Happy Thanksgiving week. We're going to start our recording now. And I want to thank you for all the feedback that you've given me on prior sessions and the way that it's helping, the way that you're sort of like testing things out in life around you. These are always just absolutely great stories. As I said, this is the Sunday before Thanksgiving. And it just seems like we are asked by family, by friends, by the media, by churches if you're in one, this pertinent question over and over, which is, what are you thankful for? And a few times is fine. But over and over and over. And have you noticed that for some people, the answer to that question just gushes forth like a bubbling fountain with no end? And thank you. I'm thankful for 30, 40, 50 things. For other people, they're quiet and reflective. And sometimes for us, we really have to stop and think. And for others, it's really hard for them to think about what they're thankful for. And so, as we approach Advent, then, and the theme of hope, it'll be coming up with Christmas, the light of the world coming to us out of darkness, as we promised. And we see the truth of this in history. We see it in nature with our plants. We see the truth in the lives of other people. It's hard sometimes for those of us and our loved ones, and of course untold numbers of people out there in our world right now, it's hard for them to hope. And it's hard for some of us at times in our lives who are stuck in dark places to hope. And when we cannot see that light coming out of the darkness. I've certainly been there many times in my life. And sometimes hope is often misunderstood. Hope can be used in the wrong way. And so I thought it might be a good idea to kind of explore and clear up some misunderstandings about thanks and hope. And I see many people during my weeks who have attached their hope to the wrong people, to the wrong things in life, and maybe they don't know the difference between unrealistic hope and realistic hope. And once they get that straightened out, there's a lot of light that comes into their darkness. So this is a little piece or lesson from our life class, our LIFT program, called Afraid to Hope, and I'll borrow from it, but also infuse it with my own flavors here. Wanting to hope, but afraid to hope. Have you ever found yourself in that position? Of course you have, as a human being. So here's a quote. Hopelessness is the culmination of the many negative expectations that a person has toward himself and his future. Now, we've talked a lot about sort of there's a big continuum on reaching a state of hopelessness where a person just simply can't visualize him or herself in this world anymore. Like, I just kind of can't be there. And then this great extreme where we so sadly have lost people in this nearby population to suicide in this last week. This is a big continuum, and both kinds of hopelessness have their basis in depression, whether it is a low-lying dysthymia that's kind of been in our families, or maybe we were born with, and an acute episode of depression. But while hopelessness causes negative expectations of the future, one way to define hopelessness is what many of us that come from maybe a complex trauma background experience at one time or another is this: it's sort of the belief that the negative circumstances that I find myself in now are just going to stay that way forever, in order, really not being able to see or feel, or that I will feel differently. And I find this with women sometimes more than men. It's just something in our psychology. Those things I'm going to talk to God about, should I get up there. But I think it's one of the unfairnesses of life. And so because of that, that voice in our head can say things like, what's the point? I might as well give up. There's not anything I can do to improve the situation, so I'm just going to sit here. You know, my repeated best efforts to talk to people, explore different options, all my hard work at trying different kinds of approaches, nothing has worked. Each has resulted in failure. So I guess there's nothing more I can do. It is indeed hopeless. So those are the kind of messages. And I want to show you a little bit about why you may not be like that at all, and that's great. But I want to help you understand people that may just kind of sit in that kind of thinking because of what's happened to them in their life. This will give you a lot more understanding and compassion for them and how to work with them, how to minister to them. So, by definition, hope is that is the hope that things will improve if I do the right things. My future will be better than it is right now. So we have to understand that hope is not just wishful thinking. It's not a passive experience in wishing about a fantasy where I hope that, okay, I am going to sit here and I am going to intention in my mind, and I am going to pray about this, and I am going to just sort of, you know, if I send this good energy, if I send this prayer, surely things will get better and surely things will happen. Well, no. Hope is actually a verb. It is active. This may change your definition a little bit, and that will be good. Hope takes your situation and it asks, how do I make this better? It sets specific goals. It thinks through options. It weighs out what it will take, and it knows it's going to be hard work. It counts on it being rough going. And then it, probably in consultation with other healthy people, it comes up with some kind of reasonable plan. Okay, that's a very, very different definition than if you were to just sort of go around and poll people. Most of us were taught a very vague, ephemeral concept, sort of like Tinkerbell, or Walt Disney, or an angel. I wish, you know? That's not it. So what we find is that a lot of our misery comes from pinning that fairy tale hope that it's kind of a version of someday my prince or princess will come. We'll have somebody in our life that we expect something from. It's usually we want to get a feeling from somebody, we want to get attention from somebody, or we want a specific behavior. Like someday somebody is going to stop using drugs. Someday somebody is going to stop failing in school and get smart. Someday somebody's going to stop acting out. Someday somebody is going to just wise up and be part of the family again. So this is a really great thing to discuss before Thanksgiving dinner, which is one reason why I picked it out, and Christmas holidays. So, we have this, I don't know, everybody's telling you to be thankful, and light comes out of darkness, and we're just sitting here before the Thanksgiving holidays feeling like a train's getting ready to come in some way at us. What do? Well, maybe with some of this information, we could have some different thinking as we approach these meals. Maybe our wagon's been attached to the wrong horse all along. Is it possible? So when I kind of lean in and someone tells me about why they're so miserable with their life, that they've attached their wishing and the faux hoping to someone changing or doing something different, my question is usually, what makes you think that suddenly this person or group or whatever it is will have the capacity to meet your need after 60 years or whatever it might be? Well, I just keep hoping. So this is not hope. This is a term that we give it called magical thinking. And this is something that comes very easily, sure did to me, to those of us who had some trauma in our background because we had to escape what was really going on and go into magical thinking. I've told you a lot about my own childhood where I created other little worlds that I could escape into. To do that, I got great at it. And I really thought in my developing codependency, growing up, that if I just tried harder and I just thought the best of people and I just listened to what was said in church and applied that surely. So, I was a poster child for this kind of stuff. And, that's kind of, why I had to have a lot of recovery from it. And as soon as I began to learn the difference, I was absolutely appalled at how far afield that I had been from what the real definition of hope actually is. So it's a very active approach to life, and it's kind of a delusional thing. This is what I saw about the first few decades of my life, because it was a way of me denying how bad my life actually was. And for some people, it's just sort of a la 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 la, everything's great, everything's gonna be better, and living in kind of a fantasy world. As I said, one day my prince is going to come, one day my father is going to become a fuzzy teddy bear, one day my mother is going to sober up, and start cooking Thanksgiving dinner instead of passing out at the table. I mean, whatever the situation is going to be. So the difference between realistic hope and unrealistic hope, it kind of starts with an analytical process. So we've talked about the limbic brain, the emotional, we've talked about the adult brain. So here we are in the adult brain with the cortex, and we look at the situation realistically, and we evaluate the options, and we evaluate the work that it's going to take, the perseverance it's going to take. What are the realistic expectations in light of our own strengths and our weaknesses and the supports? With a lot of people, it's getting as specific as, okay, I only have tolerance to stay 2 hours at the lunch. I know I can't go beyond that. I need to take my own car, perhaps, something like that, versus always capitulating to drive with the brother who you don't get along with anyway, and make yourself spend the night in your childhood room, where you can't breathe and you come home and it takes a week to recover. I mean, I'm just saying, these are changes that people make, and they're amazed at the quality of their life. They never knew that they had these choices. So the plan is based on things that are realistic. The plan gives hope. The plan gives genuine hope, because it's looking at what can be changed versus what can't be changed. So right away you're elevated to possibilities. You're out of the dark and you're in to the light. Already you have something to be thankful for. Thank God I can make choices I didn't even know I had. You're taking agency over your life. So, unrealistic hope is just that fantasy, wishful thinking that sets us up to fail. It sets us up to be disillusioned, to go into despair, to have all kinds of negative thinking. And so you can have this fantastic, unrealistic plans that are very elaborate, and usually we tie up all kinds of time and money. This time, this will make her happy. This time, we can pull this off. And you can put tons and tons of energy into trying to make that happen. But because it's not realistic, what happens? Eventually, you end up feeling even more hopeless. So, it's just a self-defeating cycle. One question I try to ask people at the end of the year is, what self-defeating cycles do you want to give up? What's one thing you keep doing and expecting that you don't want to carry into this next year? But we may be afraid to give that up. We're afraid about what people think. But it's a great question. So, in the light of complex trauma, someone said that there are 5 different types of hopelessness, and I had never heard this before, and I think this is really interesting. It's just always so great when you can put a name on something, and even better when you can relate to it, and I can certainly relate to most of these at one time in my life. The first is feeling alienated. So, this would be as much as we try to fit in at home. You may feel like, these people really aren't my family. You just feel out of step. Or it may have been at school, or it may have been both, to fit in with peer groups. You just don't fit in anywhere, regardless of what you do. You just feel alone, rejected, alienated. And so there's a hopelessness that goes with that kind of alienation. And so there's that. And then number 2 is something called abandonment hopelessness. Trying desperately to connect, but there's nobody there for you. Nobody's really in your corner fighting for you. Nobody's really supporting you. So as a child, you're facing this big, bad world all alone. And that's just such a haunting feeling. So to a child who's too small, too weak to face the world alone, that's just a very overwhelming feeling. Third, there's something called uninspired hopelessness. And I'll use kind of a graphic example of this because it's easy to see in the disadvantaged. Say there's a person who wants to have a better life. So picture somebody, a little boy who grows up in the hood, and there's gangs, and there's violence, and there's poverty, and there's racial prejudice, and the only jobs around that he knows of are in drugs or prostitution, and it's just such a bleak situation. Deep down, the kid really wants to get better, but as hard as he tries, he can't find any opportunities. He can't really even find anybody that's a good role model. And he doesn't have anybody to support him or encourage him. And he doesn't have the right skin color. No matter what he tries to do to improve his life, there's no option that's workable. So he just kind of drifts down to the level of his buddies, that place of hopelessness. The fourth one is called helpless hopelessness. And that's a young child, let's say, in a family that's abusive. And they want to change the family. They don't want all the fighting. They want it to stop. They want the hurt to stop. But they're too little. They're not strong. So they feel helpless to make choices that they can put into action because they're too small. So their helplessness leads to hopelessness. And then the last one, number 5, oppression. You could see this in a graphic example that most of us can't relate to, but we could imagine this would be as in other cultures where there is slavery, and certainly in all that we hear about actual human slavery, or all that we hear about sex trafficking, when we just cannot imagine someone being held human hostage. But I think on a level where we have been in a horrible, controlling, maybe narcissistic, abusive relationship, where the air around you is so thick with oppression and you just can't see any way out, that is a form of oppression that I think indeed or domestic violence engenders a form of oppression. And this leads to a feeling of kind of, again, haunting hopelessness. So if that gives you a perspective of 5 legitimate types of hopelessness that make it really difficult for people to just rip off a Thanksgiving list, or, yeah, I see the light coming out of darkness at Advent. This is just kind of another side of things that in this class we really talk about, what's really going on, instead of, the smiling and the nodding along with the rest of the herd sometimes, because we need to acknowledge and heal from these things. And I want to talk about hopelessness, because many of us have lived in hopelessness for so many years that it's hard to remember sometimes what's the point of even hoping, because that's a dangerous place to go. So there's a lot of research on hope, and it tells us that a person who has discovered the difference between good, realistic hope, which I've outlined, and the hope that they misunderstood, if they can make this difference, has a lot better capabilities of managing stress, anxiety, ability to deal with adversity, managing frustrating circumstances, and people that don't really, when they hit adversity, it makes them more depressed. But realistic hope can give a person this sense of optimism that's just been covered up with all this negative thinking. So if we can make this shift, we can face these difficult situations and handle life better. So hope, true hope, is a necessary thing if a person wants to experience happiness and a sense of well-being. And hope is a healer. And there are many, many cases where this is not going to happen without medication, and I totally am for that, because I think it could get down in our biology, and it needs to work in concert with all of these other things. But if there's no hope at all, people aren't even going to try that. They're in such a hopeless place. They'll go in with such a negative mindset that is going to fail. So hope enables positive action. So people that are hopeful in the right way tend not to go back down into old destructive behaviors. they take that action. Remember our plan that I mentioned. They take action, and when they start to see and experience some positive change, it starts to have a little ripple effect, and it gives more hope. And then it gets them to begin setting goals. And then they know that they can make a difference if they have more positive results. And it just starts to feed off each other in a positive way. So people with hope are likely to make more positive choices for themselves. And I love seeing this catch fire in a person's life, which is nothing more exciting to see, and to see people's lives change. They're likely to eat better, they're likely to exercise more, they're likely to take care of themselves, they're likely to start really fulfilling responsibilities for the first time in a long time. They're likely to invest in relationships because they are able to finally see a future. And the other way, the hopelessness, not shifting, staying where they are, just leads back into that sense of isolation. And they just, go back to the line of thinking that says, well, let's just shut this down because nothing makes a difference. So the point is, hope is necessary for growth, for positive changes in your life. It leads to joy, leads to courage, leads to confidence. And then you've got enough oomph or gumption to start playing some of these positive messages to defeat some of these old negative ones that we've talked about. And that just really can't if you're hopeless. You just don't have the energy to do that. Hopelessness leads to a type of distorted thinking where we just believe a whole lot of lies. We just really do. We just don't have the energy to counteract them. But when we have hope, we're able to catch those things, and it has such a positive effect on our thought life. Hope affects every part of who we are in a positive way, and it is a necessary attitude if we're beginning the journey of recovery, whether that is from codependency, a loss, following a divorce, following a defeat, coming out of depression, a life change, starting a new job, whatever it might be. Now, we have this thing called the Beck Hopelessness Scale, which is actually an assessment that we use in psychology. And there's true and false answers to like 20 questions. And there's questions like, is true and false. Number one, I look forward to the future with hope and enthusiasm. And then two would be like, I might as well give up because there's nothing I can do to make things better for myself. Three is when things are going badly, I'm helped by knowing that they can't stay that way forever. And then four would be, I can't imagine what my life would be like in 10 years. So there's questions that flip-flop back and forth. I won't read them all. But, there are assessments that, are there that a person can kind of, see where they are, on that spectrum. And, some people are kind of ambivalent on that. Other people, you can help them see that they're really going down into a funnel and that this really needs to be addressed with them, and that they really do need some help on this. So we're finding out in science that a lot of this comes from that complex trauma of not having those 12 basic needs consistently met in childhood that we've talked about on almost every single session. Had that been somewhat of a healthy childhood where there's a certain contentment and joy that is absorbed by the child and they feel supported, that would not be the case. But where there's an environment where the child does not feel safe, has been very emotionally unattached, feels in danger, they can't have a hope that their needs will be met. They just can't. And every child comes into the world with that their parents are the ones who will meet that need. It's just natural. Whoever's around them, these figures they see, you guys are the ones who are going to meet the need. And that you're the only ones. So, and you were the ones to trust, right? So it's only a natural thing. So when that need is not met, they experience hurt or pain or negative emotions. The thing is that when we're kids, what do we think? We always think it's because I did something wrong, right? You did something wrong. We never instinctively go, oh, it's not me, it's because they did something wrong. That does not occur to us. So the child comes into the world thinking the parents will consistently love them, and that if their needs aren't met, it's their fault. And then what the brain does, the brain is ever creative, it just starts looking and looking for solutions. It tries to figure out, I'm the child, tries to figure out what I should have done differently in order to get that need met. I'm gonna start with option A. Oh, that didn't work. I'm gonna go to option B. That didn't work either. Okay, I got an option C in my back pocket. Well, that didn't work. Okay, I'm gonna spend time thinking about another option. Oh, that looks like that's working. My little hope, my little fire of hope is reborn. And then it goes, okay, because maybe this will work. So as long as my brain keeps coming up with options, I've got that hope of getting that need met, and my hope will stay alive. But finally it gets to the point where it concludes, I've tried every option available, but that need's still not been met. And then my hope dies. And then I feel helpless to change the situation. So that is a cycle that happens, and the statistics, I think these are pretty good. These are the ones that Tim Fletcher's done a lot of research for. When they poll a large sample of people on when they think that their hope really died, and they grow up in complex trauma homes, there's a lot of evidence that somewhere between 10 and 13 years of age, when the child's been trying since they were conscious, that hope finally dies somewhere between 10 and 13. It takes a long, long time for hope to give up, because the child is endlessly creative in their solutions. And this hope is trying to get a mom or dad to love them, to validate them, to connect with them, to encourage them, to accept them. And so, often this happens in alcoholic homes, and just kind of go into a numb zone or a neutral zone. So there are things that give inconsistent results. It's not just black and white. So the example of gambling is used. Let's say you get the jackpot many times, and then you don't, but the times you don't, your brain says, but we've won in the past, so if we just keep trying, surely we'll win this time. So hope stays alive longer. But if there's been inconsistent reward along the journey, that's why hope doesn't die until 10 or 13. So it's called the principle of intermittent reinforcement, because sometimes, let's say, Daddy does take me out for ice cream. He's not always in the bedroom. No, this is not always that way. It's just enough to keep you going. And we certainly find this a whole lot, or at least I do, in the grooming process, in the dating world and unhealthy relationships. This is just sort of the bait and switch process that some people that are very predatory will use in order to sort of lure a potential datee or person that they're looking for if they're not a healthy person. Sometimes the hope continues longer than it ever should with any of us, whether we're an adult that kind of had this as a child, as a pattern coming from an alcoholic or sort of an inconsistent parenting style. It feels normal. All people mess up every once in a while. They're not perfect and just sort of like go off into that la-la place, and we don't develop the kind of boundaries that we should to take care of ourselves. I think that particularly with extreme emotional unavailability, this is something that we see in all kinds of relationships. I don't know how many of you heard Clay's sermon this morning, but it was quite good in terms of saying, just think about what is really important to you that you can honestly give thanks for this year, and he talked about be very conscious of the people that just suck you dry, that can only have one-way relationships, and be very clear about that. He was really talking about realistic hope and unrealistic hope, and as so often happens, I'll draw on the point of the sermon in introducing this class, that we kind of need to wake up about our lives at this point, decide how we're going to spend this precious time that we have. Let's spend it in realistic hope. So, if we understand where and when hope died within us, then we can pinpoint that desire or that internal conflict in us, maybe even go back in time. I may be kind of strange in this, but I can tell you one particular story that happened when I was 12 or 13, and which was very clear in a family crisis that I can no longer hope that I will be taken care of, by a parent. It's going to all be up to me to figure this out. It was very, very, very clear. And so, I'll tell you at some point in time, but this is very validating for me each week preparing for these lessons, because it helps me to go back and put things in perspective. So if I were to place hope in that, it would be unrealistic. But what I did was to make a plan to go outside of the family and sit down with someone to say, if this happens, if that happens, I'm calling you, and I think about, wow, how did I know how to do that, at that time? But we all have inner wisdom, I think, that I think God kind of puts in with us, but we need validation. Now I want to talk a little bit about sabotaging. What will happen is that it will say, your brain will say, I must make hopelessness my default. It's kind of like a setback, okay? Getting my hopes up is a very dangerous place to be. I'm setting myself up to get really hurt, and I can never let this happen again. And so now what can happen is your brain can build your own little prison of hopelessness. Okay, here's where something called triggers come in. And it's important for you to understand what your triggers are. These are things that sometimes come under the little acronym of HART. tea. Don't ever let yourself get too hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I would add in things like irritable. I would add in things like, for some people it's financial if they get too stressed about money. So before Christmas, people are worried about their credit card bill and how much they're spending. They can just get all out of sorts, financially. So with that being said, you get out of balance. Some people, if they get too successful, they're kind of flying high and things are going well. So there's this little voice that goes, okay, it's time to sabotage your recovery because you're not going to do really well when things go well. You can't trust it. How do you know? Because things have never gone really well for you. All right, so here is where this weird thing happens, where all of a sudden we find ourselves picking fights, getting angry, obsessing over things. There's just a million things that we do, and often we pick as our target a healthy person, or we pick someone that is not actually doing things we think that they are doing because we are so uncomfortable inside. So this has to do with being triggered to the fear of hope. And once we've messed things up, we go to hopelessness very quickly. So what I've seen in clients is the longer you've lived with hopelessness, the more you've had your hopes dashed during life, the more quickly you go there when something bad happens. So for some people, they're working toward a goal, they're all excited about their goal, and then one little obstacle will happen, one frustration, and then there's not a little graduation here, there's a plunge. Well, I might as well give up. So then another little thing happens in life, and another plunge. And it's just, they can't weather with resilience the patches in life. Then they may get triggered with anger or fear and go to an old behavior. And then just go, well, I screwed up that. Guess I can't do this. I'm just hopeless. The recovery just gets tossed away at the slightest failure or disappointment, especially if they get criticized by somebody, even if it's constructive criticism. So you can kind of see how this cycle goes. Okay, there's what they thought was a solid base is not a base, and they feel horrible about themselves. So this is human. You can go back to old thinking, but you have to see, you may have led a lifetime of 40 or 50, 55 years or something like that of what you have had. This is not going to happen overnight. This takes a very long time. You have to be patient with yourself. So hope being a very positive tool, if you've moved from depressive thinking, let's talk about depression for just a minute. When you come out of this almost total hopelessness that's kind of permeated your life, some depressive type of base, you're going to be doing a couple things with new tools and maybe doing them for the first time in your life. And you get all excited and you discover it's working, and hope is reborn, and hope will gradually work day by day. It will, and it will change you. But it's possible to still feel crappy for a while. You may need to get your medicine right. You may need to have more contact with people that can help you. It may be that you need to accept that there's not a quick and magic fix. If hopelessness has been your default setting, your normal for years, you're not just going to jump right out of it. So you need to accept it and be patient. And one thing that that I've been urging for a long time is to help people to, when they haven't trusted anybody for a very long time, say, let's be here for you. You know, piggyback on us. We've been there where you've been there. Piggyback on our love for you, our hope for you. You know, if you can't trust anybody, trust this process. Trust our hope for you. This is not a strange phenomenon. You are not terminally unique. We know that this works. And so often it is the collective. It is the group. And the person starts to think, well, could that many people be wrong about this? And that has been the great success of recovery. So people who are at the end of their rope wonder, what's the point? Everything they've tried has failed. They have no hope. And so, you know, I just say, well, what I've seen in thousands and thousands of lives just below me, you know, it's not a fantasy. This is not unrealistic hope. We're talking about something different. And, you know, the person begins to take care of themselves. So one of the things that you can do that is small and achievable, you start with tiny little goals and start really small, is have a routine. So getting up at the same time, going to bed at the same time, certain self-care things. It's kind of like bumper bowling where you kind of have this lane. You know, you may have been all over the place, but you start having this lane that so you don't go in the gutter. And hopelessness is part of those limbic brain activities, that wishy-gushy emotionality that's all over the place. You think about getting into the adult brain. I don't mean that you that it's going to be boring. I don't mean that you're going to act like a little old person. I don't mean that. It's just that you need to have boundaries, and God created boundaries, and for your machinery to run right, you've got to have things going rather smoothly, because your body is intended to go that way. So that's the most important things, and set up your life where you can get really good, supportive feedback. Get your cheerleaders around you. We are geared to need appreciation. You know, one small thing for 7 days in a row, add a second, another 7 days in a row. It's really, really important, because we've lost all value and hope in ourselves. We've gotten to that point. So hope starts to be reborn. Gradually your hope grows again. And then your hope can grow for a while. And then expect a setback. This is not going to be, you know, some rosy little walk with no hiccups. Life is not like that. Life's not like that for anybody. It's just simply not. So if you know that these are possible, just have a plan for that. Should I experience a setback, here's what it's going to look like. What are going to be my warning signs when I start to? You know, 2 days or more without quiet time, 3 days without exercise. You know, plan this out with a person that's helping you. You know, when I start feeling anxious, irritable, restless, discontent, what does that look like? So after you slid back a little bit, don't beat yourself up from it. Say, I'm going to learn from this. Here's what I'm going to do next time that's different. I'm going to grow into a greater place with greater hope. This is what we need to do. And so to move from self-destruction into a growth place where we can begin begin to feel that light coming back in us, we can even begin to trust that there is a light ahead, is a wonderful thing. I heard some of the most encouraging words I've heard in a long time. I love C.S. Lewis, the author, and he was talking about imagine that you are in a dusty library, volumes and volumes on the wall. No one's been in there for a very long time. And suddenly, a book springs off the shelf. Dust blows away. It opens. And you remember that God is the supreme librarian, and that those pages that have laid dormant for so long begin to spring to life, and that it's chapters out of your life that God is bringing to life again, that you thought were wasted, that you thought were forgotten, that you thought didn't count, that you regretted. No, God doesn't waste anything. He doesn't waste anything. Your hope is not in vain. Each word on that page, each punctuation mark on that page is part of a new story that will be part of your life ahead. You're not in charge of it. You don't control it. But if you can move your trust gradually into a higher being that you can believe in, and stop believing in the perfection of other people, the perfection of circumstances, and gradually begin to transfer that hope and entrust into the one who loves you unconditionally, all of these words of your life will work into a masterpiece and a pattern, and good things will happen to you ahead. I wish you a blessed Thanksgiving.